Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Gio and Joey Show. We have a special guest today, a longtime friend, but we haven't interacted in a while. Joey, Jared, how are you guys doing today?
Doing good.
Go ahead, Joey. You have asked Jared to come here tonight. You had a special reason for it. Set it up and let him introduce himself.
Yeah, so I actually got to know Jared when he was the president of the company that I work at. But the reason why I wanted to have him on this was he was at a I guess I'd call it a Christian business conference called Hyve earlier this year, and he had a sermon that really stuck out to me, that really made an impression, and I thought it had a lot of good points for the times in which we're living and the kinds of Christian boldness that we're going to need to get through this time. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, looking to talking about Jared's insights in how we can be ambassadors for Christ in the world in which we're living. So,
Jared, let me jump off here, right? Having not heard the sermon, two things always come to me when a sermon resonates with people. One, what was the motivation for the sermon? And why did you feel at the Hyve was the appropriate time to share it?
Yeah, great question. So excited to be here. So I would tell you, I have a real burden. People need to feel like their gifts can bless the world just as much as anybody else. So many times, it's the lead singer that gets all the attention. It's the pastor that gets the attention. It's the CEO. It's, somebody, on the football team. It's the quarterback. And I'm just such a believer, like everybody making the production work has value. And without some programmer, we can't do this broadcast tonight. So it doesn't matter what we'd have to say. Nobody could pull it off. So yeah, my burden for going to that conference and sharing it was a conference full of entrepreneurs. And a lot of times entrepreneurs, making money is one thing, but making a difference in the world is a whole different animal. And so I was really trying to encourage them that your calling can be just as sacred as anything else. So I'm a huge believer in that. And sometimes, our sphere of influence is the only, we may be the only person that can disseminate life and light to the people around us. But why? Yeah, I said some choice things, probably went off script a few times. I made a proposition that prophets have never been on the payroll. And so it was to reinforce what I just said about you don't necessarily have to be the typical religious person or personnel to make a big dent in the world. And if you go in history, you see a lot of people that aren't that, especially if you go into biblical history. A lot of times the prophets are not in the palace and they're not a part of the priesthood. They're coming out of the desert to say hard things, often to power. And sometimes when your paycheck is not dependent on falling in line with the hierarchy, you have the freedom to say things. And I think you have the responsibility to say things that the next person either cannot say or will not say. So yeah, that was some of the impetus for that conference.
Okay. And so what was the heart of the message? Or who were you addressing per se?
People who are not pastors, people who are not teachers, particularly people who work in the 9-to-5 business world, who, whether I'm lifting boxes or I'm counting numbers, I have a calling as equally as important as anyone else. So yeah, I would say particularly it was entrepreneurs in that conference, people trying to make a dent in the world, make an industry, and affect a lot of lives.
Okay. As you assess the church today, what do you think is the main concern as far as not doctrinally, but in the way we apply and live our lives?
Yeah. Okay, so I think the great problem in any Protestant denomination or Catholic denomination, if you will, and I would probably include a lot of religions, that the profession does not match the practice.
Mm-hmm.
That what I say and what I do aren't the same. And I'm a big believer, what we do should speak louder than what we say.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why most people are giving up in a large sense on the hope of religion. I think that's why we're seeing in a lot of countries around the world, the religious seeking more state power, because the simple faith is it doesn't have its potency anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because people haven't, what they've been professing, what they've been reading, praying, singing, it's not transforming their lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, if you think of your local Christian neighbor or your local Muslim neighbor or Hindu or Buddhist neighbor, whatever they're professing should make them, I believe, the happiest person you know,
Mm-hmm.
a person that applies excellence in everything they do, so respectable that you're like, I don't know what kind of thing that person does or believes in, but I want to learn more about it. And so, yeah, I think that's the great issue if we're talking about the church specifically. The profession of the church is loud and it's in your face and we're amazing and God can do all these things. But the actual practice behind closed doors is all but gross to many people, and horrible things have happened to them. So as much as I may want to tell someone Jesus loves you, they may come back to me. I had an interesting conversation recently, and this guy said, let me tell you about Jesus. Jesus was the guy that my pastor spoke about every weekend. But what he did to me as a 9-year-old every single week for years, I want nothing to do with Jesus.
Mercy.
So what
Mercy.
I may mean for positive could be an
Mm-hmm.
complete opposite.
Yeah, yeah. I heard a sermon years ago. To me, it's the most powerful sermon on prayer the most powerful sermon on prayer I've ever heard. And there's a line that I always remember. He says, we too often talk about what God has done in the past and what God will do in the future, but we live our whole lives as if the power of God doesn't exist. And that's kind of what you're touching on, right? The profession has to match the life we're living. And often, we don't see it.
Yeah. And people want to see it. They want to believe in something that has the power to do something. If not, I'll change the channel.
Yeah. Joey, jump in.
Yeah, so making this like bringing us into the practical example that you brought up in the sermon, right? Our church, right? We're Seventh-day Adventists, but this really applies to all Christian denominations. And then our whole world, our churches and our world went through a crisis recently, right? In 2020 with COVID. And one of the things you pointed out is how we kind of failed that crisis. So could you kind of elaborate for the audience, like how you think the church failed the crisis? And then because we believe Jesus is coming soon, right? We know COVID-19 is not going to be the last crisis to come upon this earth. So what can we learn from the failures that you think we engaged in 2020 for the future?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, that audience at that conference was uniquely a Seventh-day Adventist audience. So when I was making my comment about the church let the world down, I was speaking specifically about the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So I'm going to try and speak as if somebody listening doesn't know anything. And so here's what I would tell them. The longest living people in the world, there was 5 places identified. One of them was in North America, in Loma Linda, where people live longer, more to 100, happier, healthier, playing pickleball, swimming, golfing than anybody else. And they started to identify the characteristics of why is this happening? Why do these people live 10 years longer than everybody else in 30 miles west in LA or whatever, what have you? Seventh-day Adventists also have a history in wellness and prevention. And in one of the longest running health studies called the Adventist Health Study, somebody wants to Google it or ChatGPT it. It's a fascinating story on the minimal amount of chronic disease among Seventh-day Adventists. Just a healthy group. I think of during Vietnam, the Seventh-day Adventist Church historically didn't bear arms. It was kind of what's the term? Conscientious objectors.
Objection. Yeah.
Yeah. So my uncle, so the Adventists were basically, well, you guys are so healthy, you make great case studies and guinea pigs, and I think it was at Fort Detrick up in Maryland. They invited, and there's some interesting story on who got to go there and not go to war. But my uncle was one of those in the white coat program.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And at this, during this time, they experimented a lot of biological weapons on these Seventh-day Adventist young men, particularly my uncle being one of them. And it all but ruined and messed up quite a bit of a generation of these guys. My uncle developed schizophrenia, all these different things, which many of them did.
Mm-hmm.
Why do I tell you all that? Adventists have historically been known as pretty obsessed with health. You know, you go back 150 years and it was like physical health and spiritual health we view equally. Smoking is just as bad as cheating on your wife. And I'm being a little bit facetious, but the idea was physical law and moral law, we look at pretty similar. Like your body is a temple, care for it in all the ways you can. So yeah, how did then the Seventh-day Adventist Church let the world down in through COVID? You did not hear anything, and I'm being a little bit extreme. You heard probably a little bit here and there, but for the most part, you did not see the Adventists on TV, on media that the Adventists were pumping out, or billboards of, are you taking care of your physical body? And if you'd like to know how, we're a great case study. Instead, it was the same things that everyone else was saying. And what we ended up finding, and now we see all the clearer today, that if you had other risk factors, obesity, diabetes, you know, heart disease, high blood pressure, all these things that Adventists historically would say, hey, we don't have those in this population. The people with those risk factors were significantly more likely to have major issues through all the time of COVID. So to me, I think that's bearing false witness. It's not telling people that you hold or you sit on information that could help a lot of people. Now, I don't know all the reasons for that, and I'm not going to get into all the conspiracy, interesting, fun discussions. But I would say one thing: the data now shows Adventists don't practice the things that led them into that study to be so healthy and with minimal chronic disease. The data from the Seventh-day Adventist Church shows most people don't subscribe in their daily practice to the things that led the Blue Zone study to identify them as the longest living Americans, as having such minimal chronic disease. So there's some arguments to say we couldn't come out and say that, because people would say, oh, so you guys believe this, teach this? And I think in practice, if people were to come around to our churches and to hear and see a lot of the information coming from our bigger channels, I don't know if it's our reality anymore. So
Mercy, well,
maybe, yeah.
No, that would be sad if you know, if a newer study came out and it shows we're not practicing that, because you're right. During that time, I was in Houston at the time, the Houston area, and we were one of the first, our area pastors were one of the first ones to recommend shutting down to, you know, slow the curve. And because we took it serious, but quickly after that, we realized, hey, something's not adding up here, right? And that's what, to me, what I like to say, and sadly, what I took from that COVID time is I finally saw how brother will betray brother at the end times. Because some of the attitudes that were taken towards people who just believed differently was horrific. And like you're pointing out, we weren't leading the charge. We weren't informing people of the truth we hold. It seems like we just wanted to keep it in-house, or we were afraid that it may not work. But the numbers, like you said, bear it out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a good case study to say, whichever side of the equation you were on, how did your behavior, if you were run back the tapes on emotions and words said, and then based on all the information we have today, would you practice and say and do the same things? You know, I think what's great about believing in advancing light is that you always have time to learn more and confess that, hey, if I knew what I knew now, maybe I'd do things differently. And I'm sure there's people on both sides of that discussion that we watched for 3 to 4 years that would probably say, yeah, I'd have done some things a little different. But definitely on the health side of things, boy, I think we sat on our hands as Seventh-day Adventists through that time.
So totally agreeing with you. And the other thing I would say that historically Seventh-day Adventists have been very good at standing for is religious liberty, liberty of conscience, right? And the kind of basic principles of the Constitution, right? Grounded in the Declaration. And I just thought of those two things, right? Well, on the health thing, I would point out too that in 1917, the U.S. and the world was also hit with a pandemic. I believe it was the Spanish flu. And there's actually are stories of Seventh-day Adventist institutions, right? No one dying, right? In other words, there was death in the rest of the nation, and yet in these certain Adventist institutions that practice the health message, they had exercise and natural treatments, no one died, right? Including of some of the non-Adventist people that were in our institutions. Whereas imagine had that been the case with COVID, right? Like you would have had New York Times reporters and MSNBC reporters and Joe Rogan and all the people like, who are these people? And then had that happened, right? What people don't like when they don't connect the natural stuff to religion, right? Like had we been faithful, right, in that and proclaimed that message, right, the world would have looked to us. And then imagine, right, an Adventist on Joe Rogan at the height of the pandemic in a 4-hour conversation, and then they say, oh, and also Revelation 13 tells us about an image to the beast coming, right, where freedom is going to be lost, right? And in other words, we would have had the opportunity to preach a message of Jesus soon coming, right, if we'd have been faithful in the health message, but then also in standing up for liberty of conscience, right? Because people would have come to us and would have flocked to us like, hey, wait a minute, here's a church that will stand up for my right to make a decision about my body. Here's a church that's gonna give me good health information. So I feel like being faithful in these two things that don't seem connected to religion would have actually advanced our message. But I like your point about we can't undo the past, but we can learn from it.
So Joey, let me comment on that because I think I did touch on that in the sermon. That's probably the part that got me in some super hot water. And that is this: if you Google and ChatGPT the history of Seventh-day Adventists, what do these people talk about? What do they preach about? You're going to find a theme for I always say 150 years, but it's probably, you could say almost 200 years, right? You're going to find a theme of, we believe the earth is not sustainable. By necessity, we believe in the second return of Jesus. And then you're going to find another theme, which is, we believe that Jesus makes this warning in the book, The Revelation of Jesus Christ, that his church would turn against him. Wild stuff. Adventists are pretty unique in this. I think some of the Protestant reformers from a few hundred years ago were following this line, and there's some evidence for that. But Adventists historically have been known of believing an idea that there's these two beasts in Revelation 13. One is the old world, where Rome mixed religion and government, and we call it the Dark Ages. And correct me if I'm wrong in any of my prophetic understanding here. Then there's another idea of there's another kingdom that's going to rise up, another empire that's going to rise up after the fall of Rome. Around the late 1700s, early 1800s, you're going to see this second power rise up. And the Adventists historically have said that's going to be the United States. We believe this is America in Bible prophecy. And we have all these reasons Adventists do to proclaim this. And then the discussions go on.
Let me jump in here real quick. You can lay it all out because I just did Revelation 13 and 14 on the Gio and Joey Show Friday night. So
okay, all right.
Don't hold back.
So people can reference back, right?
Yeah.
All right. As I butcher it, please listen to Gio and Joey give you the correct thing. But I'm going somewhere. So basically, you have this idea that like in the old world, when faith lost its power, it turned to the government and said, "Hey, people won't just come to church. Like we need to force people to think a certain way." And so Adventists historically, I mean, man, we rent out stadiums and tents and hundreds of years, millions of Adventists are made media and materials proclaim we think Christianity is going to have an oversized influence one more time on the American government to enforce morality in America. I think of the show The Handmaid's Tale, and it just shows the awful idea of Christians taking over government. And boy, this is heated right now. This is a very interesting topic in America right now. But Adventists, I'm picking on Adventists for a moment. Adventists have said this idea. This we believe this is going to happen one more time. The church is going to lose its power. It's going to turn to power in order to enforce dogma, and it's going to remove people's right to choose how they want to live their life. And then you enter COVID, and as a pastor, I'm told you cannot write letters of religious exemption for your members. And so I had to go outside of the bounds just to appeal to the idea of conscience of an individual disassociated from any movement and write letters to help people keep their jobs. Now, whether you agree with that idea or not, the point was I was trying to honor people's wishes and convictions. And I'm a big believer we should be all about respecting people, even if their ideas and things directly oppose ours. So anyway, the Adventist Church goes through COVID and is on record for not defending the religious liberty of its members. And you're going to have lots of people argue that. Well, look, I can just tell you in my local context, that was reality.
Yeah.
And so now I'm no longer pastoring. And so back in the business world, now it's like, imagine having that conversation with someone of an Adventist saying, "Hey, I want to tell you the Adventist view on Bible prophecy, and we think this could happen in America, and that your freedoms could erode. Oh, and you should be a Seventh-day Adventist. All you have to do is Google, well, how'd you guys handle the COVID thing?" And people would say, your church didn't support its members' convictions through something that was arguably minor. Now, it was major, but nobody was being killed for not doing one way or the other. And I just think, I don't know what credibility is left. And I know that sounds a little stark, but to the sincere person watching and flipping through YouTube, looking for where is God moving and leading, I don't know, and I'm not trying to sound too critical, but I don't know why they stop on Adventism and think, oh, this is the group that's doing it very different than the next. And that doesn't mean I don't see the beauty in so many of the things that the Adventist Church teaches. But boy, what a missed opportunity.
Oh, yeah. I didn't like the way we handled it. Let's just put it that way. I'm a current employee, and I, like you, helped people during that time. I wrote letters if I had to. My wife's a medical doctor. We helped people behind the scenes in private to help them get over COVID and things like that. That being said, though, how do we move forward? There's grace and there's forgiveness, and I'm talking about individually, but the concept as well, right? Corporately, how do we move forward? Because as Joey alluded to earlier, there's going to be more crises coming. We know that prophetically. So how do we move forward?
Before Jared gives his answer, I just want to say one thing, right? Because obviously we're all still Seventh-day Adventists. We still believe in our prophetic message and our church. And the thing I would say to any Adventists who may be watching that are disillusioned, you shouldn't be that surprised in this sense. God's people on earth have always been a screwed up bunch, right? We've always, the history of the Old Testament, right? God's chosen nation. Look how often they went into idolatry. Look how often God had to be like, cut that out. Stop it. What are you doing? Right? Look at to your quote about the prophets not being on the payroll. look how the prophets, the minor prophets, were treated. Look how, how many of them were sawed asunder, were killed. That didn't happen to the people who disagreed in COVID. Now, the church, obviously the church doesn't have political authority, so that kind of helps. But like, God's people have always been a hot mess. God has always been weaving his story through very imperfect people. So it's like, yes, I agree with you totally that we missed the ball. But I would just say to anybody disillusioned, like God's people missing the ball isn't anything new. So, but other than that, yeah, I'm interested in how we move on too.
Yeah, that's fair. I appreciate that. So I think there's an increasing number of people who are disillusioned with organized religion.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep going back to Jesus himself seems to, in the book of Revelation, all but say the organized elements turn against him.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than arguing, well, which church do I have my denomination at? I just think
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little disillusioned with that safety, and I think illusion that many people have had forever. Maybe through COVID, they were awoken from, oh, maybe just having my membership at a local church isn't just all that needs to be. Like, what do I believe? What do I think? How do
Mm-hmm.
I treat people? So I do think it's easy. And I would say Adventist for a while, it was easy to just associate yourself with like this brand or this entity. And I don't think that's a safe thing. So going forward, yeah, I think for me, it's like, how do you individually show up in the world,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of affiliation? I think of one of Ellen White's best books, Desire of Ages, and she had this chapter called "The Least of These My Brethren" about the judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Boy,
Mm-hmm.
she draws from things from Zechariah and these ideas that there could be people in heaven who don't understand the wounds in Jesus' hands. Like, tell me about these.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to be shocked with how God is so honoring of people's internal conscience and motives. And I think those are others of us are going to be shocked with, but I was a part of this church, but I
Mm-hmm.
believed and I did these things. And I really do think it comes down to how did you treat people, often that you disagree with. I think that's a pretty big
Mm-hmm.
component when you really want to know how your behavior and character are. Find somebody you directly disagree with. But going forward, I'm a huge fan of whatever you profess to believe, your daily practice in your life has to surpass it. So
Mm-hmm.
so rather than picking on the church in the health message, I need to be the healthiest person people know,
Mm-hmm.
both internally and externally, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And where I might have been dogmatic for years on, well, you got to eat like this, you got to do this. You know what? I just got to live by example. People got to
Mm-hmm.
see it. They got to say, wow, whatever that guy's doing in his marriage, those people seem happy.
Mm-hmm.
Their daughter is well behaved. Their home is in order. And I think for too long, people have kind of, and probably I would say many religions, we just associate ourselves with the idea of the religion and what does your church believe? And we just like could send people to a corporate website. What do you believe? And don't get into a false safety of just thinking what a corporate board may vote, or
Mm-hmm.
the Adventist context, a general conference session may vote or say.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't save us. What other people think and do doesn't save us. Like individually, what deep down, what are our motives? Like, what's driving me today? I could be paying tithe and smiling and doing all these things to the people I go to church with, but it may just be selfishness. Like, I'm actually trying to get a job from these people,
Yeah.
and I just want to look the part. But in reality, like, what are your motives? And a lot of times, if we don't slow down long enough to just say, what is my motive for writing this person a text, sending them an
Mm-hmm.
email, calling them, saying hi to them? It may actually be a selfish motive, even though the thing may be a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So going forward, yeah, I think individually, rise up and be an example, and make the things you profess to believe beautiful and attractive. And not to go off too much on a rant, but
Mm-hmm.
increasingly, I am obsessed with the practical. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's so easy to get lost in the theological sauce of these big words and
Mm-hmm.
first angel, second angel, third angel, righteousness by faith. I mean, these big Adventist theological things. It's like, tell me how that affects you on a Thursday afternoon in rush hour traffic. How does this affect you when your kid breaks something valuable? Then I can understand these deep theological terms because they start to get real.
Something you said earlier about, loving, or how do you treat those who you do not agree with. And I like to tell people, if you cannot pray for your enemies, then you have a bigger issue than your enemy. You have a heart problem, right? And that's the practical godliness we have to live. Because even though during this time of, where I saw the ugly in people, I still have to remember that I have to minister to them. I have to love them. I have to, like the song says, treat them like Jesus. But it's real. It's real. What we went through cannot be dismissed. Yet some who are on the wrong side of this try to pretend like nothing ever happened. And that's not right either.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's and I can say, looking back, I can see some people even in just their sentiments, both sides, there's some fault to be had. But then again, I think of this guy. Okay, so I've been following this guy on TikTok. His name's Richie. I've just reached out to him. Richie, I guess, has like stage 3 or 4 cancer. He just did a 40-day water fast. So you got all these people watching. Like, he's like, I'm going to beat cancer. I'm going to do all this stuff. And just drinking water and all these different things. Well, then he goes back to the doctor, and apparently he's got the tumor still there. Or it's even bigger and it's worse. I just say that to say sometimes we think the health message is just avoiding some things. Health message is not doing, when sometimes you got to be proactive. So I think in COVID, you had some people say, well, I'm not taking that, and therefore I'm healthy. It's like, well, not doing something doesn't make you healthy. What are you doing to actually be a healthy person? Anyway, so I'm a huge fan of how do we set the example and make it beautiful.
Amen for that. Go ahead, Joey.
Before I ask the next question, to kind of tie into this practical stuff, I wanted to highlight a point you made too about, obviously I am, I think we're all members of the Seventh-day Church, but like, I liked your point about not focusing so much on that, right? Because like a corporate structure doesn't save you. And the other thing I liked about that is something, again, that Mrs. White said, where God has something to the effect of God has more sheep in other folds, right? There's a Revelation, right? It says, like, a big part of the three angels' messages is come out of her, Babylon, my people. So in other words, God has people in all the other churches, right? In other religions, right? And as people who, follow the Bible and stuff, we're supposed to be calling people out of a false system or false systems. And so the way I look at it is like, listen, I have friends who are Catholic, and I have, very strong disagreements with Catholic theology and whatnot. But then I look in a practical context, and they're standing up against elements within Catholicism, right? Like something called Catholic integralism that wants to move back more into that medieval model. And my Catholic friends are saying, hey, no, that's wrong, right? We need to respect liberty of conscience and religious freedom. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to call out those Catholic friends. They're doing the work of God within. They don't have all the truth, in my opinion, but they're standing for religious liberty and liberty of conscience, right? We just had on Mikhail Olson from the Christian Post. He's a conservative Christian, and he's calling out elements of Christian nationalism that, want to impose, kind of authoritarian Christian rule. And so I'm like, yeah, these people aren't Adventists, right? I would disagree with them on some theological things, but when it comes to standing for liberty of conscience, they're taking a stand. And I think that's the work of God. That is part of proclaiming the three angels' messages, even if they don't fully know it, right? Like, that's what they're doing. God's using them. And so am I going to sit there and say, like, oh, like, yeah, if I get the opportunity, I'm going to share, the great controversy, right? I'm going to do these things because I think it'll help them. But like, I'm not going to label all of these people just because they're not in the Adventist Church as like the enemy, right? No, they're doing the work of God in the context with the knowledge that they have. But bringing it back to what you said about getting practical and focusing on the practical, you were at a entrepreneurship conference where you gave this sermon. How does entrepreneurship and Christians being involved in that, how does that play into all this and giving us the freedom to speak our minds?
Yeah, that's okay. Great question. On your point, though, I want to say this is where it may be a little heretical. I think there's been a burden for a long time of I need you to leave your religion and join my religion.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at Jesus, I don't see that. I don't see. I think he's calling people to truth, calling people to conviction, calling people to listen to that little still voice of conscience. Get on the path where you're continually advancing. I think we would do a lot better as Seventh-day Adventists with here's some beautiful things the Bible seems to make clear. We'd love to tell you about these things, and we'd love to see how God leads you and impresses you with these things. And we're going to do our best to make them look beautiful. But to say, hey, you need to go to my church, you need to be a member of my church, I think that breeds a little bit of selfishness. And hear me out. I'm not saying don't share the beautiful things, but if imagine if we were sharing, hey, we think when you die, you don't go to heaven and still watch the misery taking place on earth, and you don't go to hell and you burn. We actually believe God is so gracious, he just lets you sleep. I don't know why the Seventh-day Adventist Church doesn't have billboards around just saying that. I read something recently that said more people join the Seventh-day Adventist Church after someone near them dies. This is my mother's story. Than at any other time. I think we should be in the funeral home business, personally. But basically, the idea is people are vulnerable. They want to understand something. And I think the biblical teaching on death is glorious.
Yes.
So why not talk about that rather than, so this is true, so come join my thing because your thing's bad. I don't think we need to do that so much. I think if then people want to commune with us, fine. They can join us. But lead people to truth. Lead them to Jesus. Let him convict them of all these things we can make beautiful. Anyway,
well,
sorry.
Yeah,
that was a tangent.
No, don't worry about that.
Thing. But Joey,
yeah,
go for it.
Let me jump in here. You know, when I first got to my first district, this is close to 20 years ago, before I even spoke at my church, I had to do a funeral for a devout atheist. Like he was a professed atheist. And so I'm a new pastor, right? I'm never preach at this church. So I don't know the relationship of the church because it was my head elder and my treasurer's father. But they're the ones who told me he was a devout atheist. And so I spent the whole like week and a half in prayer. Lord, how am I gonna, because I can't preach him that he's awaiting the second coming. Obviously, you don't want to say he's going to hell. So the more I learned about him, the more I realized that he was living a Christian life, really, in a sense, without the profession, right? I'll give you the example. But here's what the Lord led me to. He led me to the negotiations between Abraham and God about Sodom. And Abraham asked a pertinent question. He asked, will not the judge of the earth do what's right? And so in my funeral sermon, that was it. That was my hook. We don't know what eternity has, but will not the judge of the earth do what's right? Where we'll be happy with whatever he does. But the reason I say he was living a Christian life, this man retired early so he could take his life savings, buy a Meals on Wheels van, and feed his colleagues or people his age who could no longer be independent for themselves.
Beautiful.
And that's what he spent the remainder years doing. Come on. If that's not, obviously I don't know where he's going to end up in the judgment, but man, that's what I focused on. He was living a life that many of us should be living. Total, like his retirement money, he spent it on feeding others. And so that's the thing that you've been talking about, right? I don't care whether you are general conference president or GC vice president or conference president. If your life at home doesn't match your profession, then I don't care what titles you have. It's not doing anyone any good. Not your kids, not your conference, not your church. And so I resonate with that. And I understand where you're coming from, because C.S. Lewis talks about when you focus on the outcome, you usually tend to butcher it. Focus on the process, right, of loving them. They'll land wherever the Holy Spirit wants them to land. And obviously, by the grace of God, they'll land at the truth. Mind you, I'm not saying denomination, at the truth.
Yeah.
And in the end, that's all that matters.
Yeah, and Gio, I want to affirm, I hope heaven is full of people that served people who needed food. And Meals on Wheels, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you read Matthew 25, sure does seem like people who do things like that make up the heavenly neighborhood. And yet other people who may profess things are going to be shocked they're not there. I think of probably my favorite statement Ellen White ever made was, many may profess faith in the truth, but if it does not make them kind, sincere, patient, forbearing, and heavenly minded, it is a curse to its possessor, and through their influence, it is a curse to the world.
Mercy, 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 mercy.
And so again, just that idea of profession and practice, what you say and what you do. I believe what you do actually has to exceed what you say for the golden rule to really be fulfilled. But Joey, okay, you touched on the idea of entrepreneurs. Yeah, I think it's such an opportunity. An entrepreneur is the leader of their organization, whether that's 2 people or 200,000 people. Their example sets the precedent, and I think their religion can translate into every minute of the day. How the employees are treated, how they're paid, how they're cared for, how they're respected, what is tolerated, what is not. And I'm really a fan of, that's such a, to use some Christian language here, that's such a mission field. Like, work is already hard enough. I don't need a CEO or entrepreneur telling me I'm dirt and I'm late, and I'm like, set the example, inspire me, make me want to do better, show up early, stay late, and pay me well. So yeah, I believe entrepreneurs, I just think it's such an opportunity to make a difference in the world, to have kind of your own kingdom and your own influence and not be beholden to anyone. Ultimately, I think it's the American dream, and probably the purest form of it is people having their own land, being able to grow their own food, enjoying some of it, selling some of it, trading some of it. I think that's in the very DNA of our being.
We're in the middle of, we just submitted an offer today on a 4-acre property, and that's what my wife, she's a gardener at heart. She likes this piece of property because it has its own well as well. And so she wants to garden for many reasons, but it's a passion. And I think independence is part of religious liberty, right? To be able to know how to live your life independently. Because part of the things of Revelation 13 and 14 is the pressure, the economic pressure that it puts on people, right? To make a decision. And that's what we saw during COVID, right? Some people got fired for standing up for their liberty of conscience. And so how do we, as, me being a pastor, you being a former pastor, but entrepreneur, Joey being a student, how do the three of us in our circle of influence teach people to rely solely on God and to live that life, right? Not to look to others to make decisions for them.
Yeah, my gut reaction would be excellence speaks volumes. A lot of times we're mediocre, we're not in shape, and I want to tell you how to be healthy. Well, we don't spend time often on following people that are mediocre. It's like, I don't follow a guy like, here's how to have a dad bod, don't work out, don't do this, whatever it may be. Here's how to have a business that loses money. I'm not following that guy. Yeah. So I think there is something about it being inspiring to people. Now, it doesn't have to mean you have the 6-pack. It doesn't have to mean you make $1 million a day. But it does have to mean the people that know you the most, the people that you work closest with or that you spend time with, they respect you. And a lot of times that can just be the little things of every time I come around Joey, I'll give Joey some credit here, throwing some flowers. Every time I've texted with Joey, it's pleasant. I don't ever feel like Joey's having a bad day. Joey's here to cheer me up. Joey's having a good day, and he's wondering if I'm having a good day. I mean, literally, I think we can be living this beautiful life in how we text people, how we email people. Just add some emotion, and how we smile at people and let them know, hey, I appreciate you. And there is just something about being around someone that has some energy and some life to give, rather than, boy, they need help, or I feel bad for them, or, oh man. And I think a lot of times people they don't maybe cater to their own life, and they're out there trying to tell other people how to live their lives. It's like, make your life one that I would want to aspire to. And then I'm going to ask you what makes you tick. I'm going to ask you why you eat this, don't eat that, go there, don't go there, do this, don't do that. I'm going to ask you about your life and how it's affecting your relationships, and how it affects why you said you sleep great. I sleep terrible. Why do you sleep great? Like, people want to know things if you do them well. So, anyway, I think there's opportunity where we could have more excellence, be more remarkable. And sometimes that's really honing in on what is that little place in the world where I'm going to be excellent, and the people around me are going to know it.
You know, I like telling people that if you want to really have influence and you don't know how to, show up early to wherever you're going and greet people with a smile. You can change the whole dynamic. Because if you've ever been late to a meeting and it's already like going downhill, you really can't affect it because you don't know what's going on, what was said before, what was said after, who got mad, who. But if you get there early and you're the first one and you're greeting people and you're saying, hello, how's your day, yada, yada, you can change the whole mood, and people notice that. And so, yeah, I like that. And you had mentioned earlier, right? It's about trying to be excellent. And it's not always easy, but just try to be excellent the majority of the time, and people have grace.
And really showing up, having good communication are big parts of it. I mean, I admire you guys. I think you told me you do this every week. Like, this is not something that just does itself. You got to show up, you got to schedule, you got to make it happen. And I admire you for that. And a lot of people don't give enough credit to consistency. Just doing the thing repeatedly, like, it makes an impact.
So you used to pastor, and you're no longer pastoring. What are you doing at the moment specifically? I know you're an entrepreneur, but I don't know personally what are you doing specifically. So
yeah, the easiest answer on a tangible level, I've got a newsletter that I'm pouring myself into every week on health. It's called One Up. So every week it's a new health habit on mental, physical, or spiritual health, and I dance between those. It's a fun creative outlet. In addition to that, I'm involved with helping with some wellness related events in short, intensive context, helping people radically improve their health in what, everybody says it, mind, body, soul, or mind, body, spirit. But not a lot of people actually get into the weeds of, let's measure, where are you at in these three categories. Physically, that's usually like, oh, what's your weight like? What's your blood pressure? What's your blood biomarkers? But mentally, a lot of people have some major stress, anxiety, and we don't deal with it. Something I've tried to learn a lot more in the past year is all about trauma and how it affects us and how we don't usually deal with it. So healing relationships. So often you'll hear somebody want to talk about health. Gio, you got to get in the gym, and Joey, you got to drink more water. But not often do people, and my dad actually found healing at a wellness retreat when the guy dwelt on forgiveness. There's people in your life, they wronged you. You have every right to be mad at them, but you got to forgive them because it is a burden you are holding on to that is literally eating at your soul and your physical health. And then there's some people you need to go apologize to and make wrongs right. So yeah, I've been in the rabbit hole, in the jacuzzi of mind, body, soul health. What does it mean? And how do you help people level up in any and all of those, which I think you're only in good health when all of those are rising together.
Yeah, no doubt.
And On the trauma bit, I'll just say for anybody who is looking for some good Christian-based resources for dealing with trauma, friend of the pod, Dr. Jennifer Schwerzer. Check her out on social media, online, her Abide network. She's got a lot of really great material, specifically dealing with trauma from a Christian perspective.
Awesome.
Bringing stuff back to the entrepreneurship bit. One thing that I've kind of had this thought in my head. I think I might try to flush it into an article or something, but I want to get your guys' thoughts too. So I like reading books on whether biographies or autobiographies on like Elon Musk, Bill Gates. I just read one on by the Palantir guy, right? Just like Silicon Valley types, right? Business startup types. And one thing that I noticed about startups, right, and the people who found them, these are people they have some mission and they're all in on it. They're all in for their company, right? They're sleeping there, they're eating there, right? They're doing everything there. And like maybe there's some places where it's like, well, maybe you need some balance. But like I think there's something about being totally dedicated to something that you then look at your average Adventist church or Baptist church or any church, and it's like, are the members even half as invested into their church life as these Silicon Valley people are into, having the next best iPhone or whatever, right? Like, and in most part, they're not, right? Like, even if we're members of a church, the church is like one little part of our life. We go there every Sabbath or Sunday. Maybe if we're like a particularly active member, we go to prayer meeting on Wednesday. But it's like, but that's about it. And the thing about that is, well, in North America, right, our churches are like we used to be the fastest growing denomination in America, and now our churches are closing doors, right? I can think of near me at least 4 towns that used to have an Adventist church that they've closed. But then I look at my friends over in Mexico, and they're multiplying so quickly that they have to add new conferences to govern the churches that are growing and popping up, because the members there are just super active in the mission and life of the church. And so I was like, what you were saying about entrepreneurship, what I was saying is that could tie in, right? It was like if we had like a startup church movement, right? Where I'll use the example that both of us know, like Country Life. Well, if for those that don't know, Country Life Natural Foods is a Adventist health business, right? To sell healthy lifestyle products, food products to the masses, right? Well, I'll just use this as a practical example. If the Adventist churches in our area were to like, hey, how do we partner with Country Life to start, a healthy restaurant in our community, right? Something that makes money, but it's also mission driven, right? Why don't we do that? Or I'm trying to think of another example. If you have an Adventist physician in your church and he's got his own clinic, well, how can your church partner with him, right? Or with your newsletter or whatever. If your local church was like, hey, how can we support this lay member who's doing something big and creative, rather than, you know what I mean? So how can we integrate our individual member entrepreneurs with the mission of the church?
Gio, you want to go first?
Well, I think of that all the time, actually. But being a minister, I'm leading out in spiritual things. Not that entrepreneur isn't. My wife had a business for 7 years. We just sold it. She's a doctor. It's just the kids are getting at the age where she wants to spend more time with the kids. But that being said, I think Adventist, like for example, you've heard of the TV show The Chosen, Jared, right? Why aren't we doing stuff like that? Because if you know anything about Dallas, the creator, he's read The Desire of Ages. As a matter of fact, he's actually defended people who chided him for even reading her book, The Desire of Ages. Now, I don't know how much influence it had on the show, but I think we could have done a better job, right? Had we let the Spirit lead. And then another thing, I think we should be more into entrepreneurship, doing more software, because it doesn't take a lot of manpower, but you can make a lot of money to help the mission. But Joey, I want to correct you on something. Well, not correct you, but like the church doesn't have to be another church. It could be an entrepreneur venture that influences people. And so in that sense, we have to stop looking stop looking at planting more churches. How's about planting more missionaries? And that, to me, would be more effective. But anyway, I didn't think you were going to ask me, so go ahead, Jared.
No, that's good. That's good. I appreciate it. It's always nice to hear the pastoral perspective.
Mhm.
Joey, I think it comes down to, so I'm actually going to just say members rather than entrepreneurs, because sometimes people are like, I'm not an entrepreneur, but everybody's got some innovation in them and some ambition. What I think it's the members saying and really assessing in their life. So I want to say this: a lot of people just don't have a handle on their life. It's kind of out of control. It's like day by day. Like people don't plan; they don't make plans for the future or next week, or it's kind of like we'll try and connect, and it's just like it's crazy, right? It's disorganized. I think if a lot of members of churches were to say, I'm gonna get my life in order, and then I'm gonna determine how much bandwidth I've got to give, to serve, to give back. And if those people were to go to the same church, to sit around a table and to say, hey, what could we do? Or could we do something here with excellence? Like, what would that look like? And I can tell you, we've been having some of those discussions at my local church, and I'm pretty proud of my local little church because there's some excellence going on. We take greeting pretty serious. You don't get greeted and the door open for you in a lot of places in the world anymore. Like still some 5-star hotels, but it's a dying art. But boy, they say people almost make their decision to come back the moment they are greeted at the doors. How about communication from the church? It's almost like we give our worst to this organization that we all come to, but it's like, what if we just said, hey, I'm almost to the point where it's, if we're not going to do this with excellence, then let's just make that known. And we're a lazy bunch of people that don't really care about church. But if instead we said, hey, what if we only part of things in life that we give our best to? And if we're all going to come to this church every weekend, what could be better? What could we do to wow people? And I think you then just start to take off, how will we welcome people? How do we make sure they know how we communicate here and get involved? When we serve food, how can we do that better? Like really making everything bite-sized. I think I see that with what you guys are doing at Country Life. Every little thing is being analyzed. How do we do this better? Let's do that. So yeah, I think it's just individuals coming together and hopefully having pastors like Gio that I'm sure would support that type of excellence and saying, all right, let's start with one of these areas. And then once we feel like we got that down pat, move to the next. But a lot of times with churches, it's like, let's do everything. It's like, well, nobody does everything well. Businesses don't do that. They focus on a thing. So I think a lot of churches probably are doing too many things when it's like, do a thing and just do it well. So if 100 new people come around you in the next few weekends, they're like, man, you been to that place? They do this very well. And I think that would gain and garner the respect of a lot of people.
Okay, cool. Hey, I want to respect your time, so let me just ask one last question from me. What do you see going forward? Do you think we have learned our lessons come the next crisis?
Well, I mean, I think it's a luxury here in America to be looking forward to a crisis when a lot of countries around the world they're in
crisis. Yep.
right? They're already in it. They've been in it. They probably laugh at what they thought was our little crisis.
First world problems.
But yeah, what do we learn? Don't put your trust in man. At the end of the day, I don't think I'm saved with where my name is on a membership book. I think it's me and my heart, my motives, my conscience. And I mean, think about it. Scripture literally brings to the point, some people are shocked that they are not saved.
Mm-hmm.
That's a mind-blowing concept. That literally means
Mm-hmm.
they just thought a totally different reality than what was taking place. So I think for a lot of us, it would be just slowing down, arguably getting out in nature, and just having some meditative time to say, what are my motives for the way I treat people, for the things I think I believe? Do I really believe them? Am I just trying to play the insurance card and say I do in case I'm right or I'm wrong?
Fire
Uh,
insurance.
yeah, right. So I would say going forward, my encouragement to anyone listening or watching this is, uh, heaven, paradise will be a safe place where even the people who may have openly said I'm an atheist, but effectively bless the people around them.
Mm-hmm.
Like the judge of the earth's going to be pretty fair.
Yep. Amen for
and
that.
and uh and don't deceive yourself. I think sometimes we're numbing ourselves with, I go to prayer meeting, I pay tithe, I show up at church each weekend, I'm doing the
Mm-hmm.
right stuff. Take all that away and just you alone. Nobody else can do this for you, but get to the heart of the matter. And I think this is where prayer is pretty powerful. Ask God, who am I? Like, what do I
Mm-hmm.
really believe? Like, help me see what I cannot see. And I think a lot of us would have an eye opening to realize, we don't know, because we go back in time and a lot of people have said, if this type of scenario were to happen, what do you think you would react? And I bet people would say, oh, I'd do this. And boy, they did a different thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As soon as something was threatened or somebody tried to convince them differently. So yeah, moving forward, I have abandoned, uh, I'm going to be very careful with my words, but I'm usually not good with that. I've abandoned the idea of we're all in this together. And I'm big on, you got to figure this out. You got to
Yeah.
wrestle. You
You
got
know,
to
it's
know, because you may be putting your faith in people around you. They may let you down.
yeah, it's funny.
Mm.
It wasn't the same tone, but kind of the same message. 2 weeks ago, I preached a sermon in my old church in Texas about that. In the end, it's just you and the Lord, man. That's it. As much as I want to save my siblings and my spouse and all that, in the end, it's just you and the Lord. Be an example, but you can't save anybody. So just make sure you're right with the Lord. Hi, Joey. Any last comments before we let our guests go to bed?
I would just say my last thing, kind of tying everything together, and I would just say to everybody, like you guys are saying, on the individual focus on what you can do in your local context, right? So like Jared was saying, find something, one thing that you can be excellent on. Maybe for you, it's leading, a Friday night Bible study in your home or at your church, right? Maybe for you, it's starting a business, right? That can, make money and do something successful. Maybe for you, it's just planting a garden that you can feed yourself, your family, or that you could share with your neighbors, or you could sell some stuff, or maybe you have some chickens and you sell some eggs or whatever. Like, find something that you can do it well, and dedicate it to the Lord. Um, yeah, I think that's basically the key, right? And then the other thing I would say is, when the crises come, remember first principles, right? Remember freedom of conscience. Remember, health reform or these things, right? Like, remember first principles and don't follow man, like you guys were saying.
Mm-hmm.
And
Jared,
Joey, I want to add
go
just
ahead.
one quick thing. I really love what you shared there, and it's a passion of mine that people value wherever they're at, that they can make a difference. I mean, I think of moms who, they're just raising some kids, and
Mm-hmm.
often they don't know if they're making a difference in the world. These kids are unruly, and what am I doing? But those moms are making a massive difference. And for any of us in any walk of life, we may feel at times, you know what, I'm not where I thought I'd be, or I'm not really making a difference like that guy or those people. We have a gift if we wake up each day to do our best with whatever lies ahead of us. And if we do that, I believe we're given greater opportunities the next day and the next day to really, for me, it's recently, who can I bless today?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the ideas of excellence and all these things, but boy, uh, trying to put others first, and that whole idea of the golden rule. What is it I'd want someone to do for me today? You know what? I'm going to go do that for this person. I think, boy, we would be a happier, healthier people and country and world if we started our days like that.
That's a powerful note in which to end. Thank you once again for joining us on the Gio and Joey Show. Jared, it was nice catching up with you, buddy.
Good to see you guys. Thank you.
So hang on here when it goes black just for a second.